I'll just make sure Carl knows.
Okay, well, I'd like to welcome you all to the Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting this afternoon. Welcome, everybody. In particular, I'd like to welcome three guests from the West Midlands Railway Executive. I've got Malcolm Holmes, who's the Executive Director, Johnny Wiseman, who's the Customer Experience Director, and Francis Thomas, who's the Head of Corporate Affairs. So welcome, and you won't have to wait very long before we come to your part of the agenda, but welcome. So first of all, I have received no apologies for today, and I'd like to ask if any members of the committee have any member disclosure of... Oops, turn it off. That's a great start, isn't it? Okay, so do any members have disclosure of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests? No? Okay. I have no chair's announcements, and so we'd like to go straight to the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 12th of February. I'm sure all the members have had a sight of it. So if we could just go through the pages, which I'll take as accuracy, and also any sort of thing that members want to raise. So we go through page 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Councillor Kandaka.
Yeah, just on this bit about minuting the various weather-related things about the question to portfolio holder. It was actually when there was windy days and things that we were talking about having the street lights on, because we seem to have them on in fog and ice. So I'm not sure that's quite what we said.
Okay, well, I'm sure we can adjust the minutes to reflect that. We get on page 4, 5 and 6. If there are no matters arising, can I ask the committee members if they'll agree that that's a true and accurate record? Agreed? Okay, I'll take that as a silence as a acquisition. We've got no public speaking. So the next item is questions to portfolio holders. This is something which is you don't have to give a notice. It's helpful if members do, but they don't have to. So do any members of the committee have any questions for portfolio holder members? Right, I've got Keith followed by Jenny. Keith, Councillor, I'll call you by your name so people know who we're talking about. Councillor Kandaka.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think I was actually last put my hand up, but this system's a bit strange. First question to Jeff is about the reallocation of road space. As he knows, I'm most perturbed by the lack of action in Nuneaton and Bedworth. Probably more so Bedworth, which is quite a COVID hotspot at the moment. And we're spending absolutely nothing in the areas where there's actually the most COVID going on. And the excuse was given, Jeff, that its areas are pedestrianised, but we have lots of issues around particularly Bedworth, having nowhere to cycle and areas being cut off by the ring road. So I'd really like to know what we are going to do about Nuneaton and Bedworth in terms of getting people in and out and trying to sort out long-standing issues that have just been ignored. And all the money is going for this reallocating road space to the places with the least COVID. So it is an issue, and we really need to get a lot of these things sorted. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Jeff, I know there's been a fair bit of traffic about this, so I think I'll ask you to answer that question first. Yeah. Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, Chair. In response to that, we have consulted with the local council. They were content with the measures that we're putting in place, and it's not true to say that nothing's been spent in Nuneaton and Bedworth. There is actions taking place in Nuneaton and Bedworth, maybe not in the same areas as others, but at the end of the day, the first round, these are only temporary measures we're talking about. They're not permanent measures, Keith. as identified. If you want more permanent measures, bring them forward and we can look at them. You can use your delegated budgets for that sort of thing as well. So there is opportunity there for more of a longer term schemes. And as you're probably aware, we're spending over £6 million in Warwickshire County Council over the next few years in relation to highway safety schemes for cycling. So there is a lot of money going in to Nuneaton and Bedworth and other areas of the county. What I would say is happy to get you a full response if there's specific points that you want to raise. I'm not sure whether the pedestrians or the councillors would want a cycle lane through the middle of Bedworth, but we're happy to have that discussion as we move forward.
Jeff,
Okay.
The only place you can legally cycle in Bedworth is round the ring road. I understand why we need pedestrianised areas which are free from cyclists, but there is no cycling within the ring road in Bedworth. We've had a cycling fatality last year in Bedworth. Bedworth is an incredibly unfriendly place to cycle. There's plenty of space, and we need to look at the road signs and do something about Bedworth, because it is really suffering from a lack of trade and is an ideal place for people to visit by bicycle.
Yeah, can I just Keith? Keith,
very briefly.
Okay, Jeff, come on quickly.
There are measures going on in parts of the ring road in Bedworth where it's practical to do so. So I'm sure Keith will be happy to see those as they're introduced. It says the plans are being drawn up, and obviously they'll be for anyone to comment on, but hopefully, and as we've said all the way along, these are temporary schemes. We're looking to see what we have done, what we need to do, and we're monitoring them to ensure that going forward we get these schemes right in the right places. So I'll get a full response back to Keith, as I said previously, Chair.
Okay, I've now got Jenny followed by Caroline. So Councillor Fradgley.
Thank you, Chair. Just one thing, I'm sorry, Keith, I'd just like to say thank you very much to the Highways team for having been so efficient in putting up the one-way systems in Stratford, and thank you enormously for the work they're putting in answering the questions of the public. I must say it has been done incredibly well. Not popular everywhere, of course, but I am getting a number of residents saying thank you very much for looking after our health and helping to open up shops. So a huge thank you there. The other thing is, I actually asked Mark a few weeks ago if we could have an update on finances, particularly in terms of the LEP and how they might be dealing with smaller projects going forward, because I understand that there is a possibility of actually looking at some of the smaller projects we have, like cycling projects, rather than actually the very, very big highways ones. And I'd like to understand how the money that the government has put up for cycling and pedestrianisation, how that's coming into the county, and how that might actually find its way into some of the priority projects which the cycling task and finish group put together. Thank you.
Right, Mark, did you want to come back onto that?
I think Izzy might have had a hand. I'm very happy to talk on that.
But... Izzy? Okay, Izzy first then. Councillor second.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we need to have absolute clarity that what we have been asked by the government is this is short-term provision of safe spaces for residents or people within towns to be able to access the town centres and the shops safely. This is to allow for the queuing that might be necessitated outside shops, on a one-in, one-out basis, and also to allow, many of our towns, not all of them, and we are blessed that Nuneaton and Bedworth both have quite a high level of pedestrianisation, but in other towns they're often very old, and we'll talk about Kenilworth if you want. This is a town that has been designed long before the car was even thought of, and built on a relatively narrow road. So it's allowing the narrow road space to be widened to accommodate it. And this is what we've worked closely with the District Council in Stratford and the Town Council, and also in Leamington. And I know too, Jeff, the work you've done with the other councils. it is about getting a consensus. We have to do it quickly, and we have got to recognise that it is temporary. It will be stopped. So all we're doing is putting in temporary measures, not long-term solutions. So the work that we have put in, the money that we have put in around cycleways is an adjacent, another piece of work that goes on. Mark will answer about that, but I think it would be absolutely wrong for people to understand that this is going to hasten or speed up the cycle paths, cycle routes that we have talked about historically in the past. This is just about getting our economy going. So it is largely about town centre spaces, but in some cases it is also about cycle routes in connection with commuting, for safer commuting, to help to manage more people who will feel they need to take the cars or perhaps their bicycles because they aren't confident about using public transport. And I think you have to work within those boundaries. Mark, over to you.
Yeah. Mark, before you start for the camera, can you just introduce yourself?
Yep, certainly. Mark Ryder, Strategic Director for Communities, and thank you, Councillor Fradley, for the feedback around the highways teams. We are trying to make the implement the agreed measures as quickly as we possibly can in those places where the investment is going to derive a benefit in terms of public health and allowing safe spaces to operate. In terms of the LEP and potential growth fund funding that could be freed up, this week my team's been working hard to think of projects and to bring forward projects that can potentially enjoy some extended funding that the government has been talking to the local enterprise partnerships about. And very much to the forefront of that is around potential for increasing, to bringing forward some of the cycling schemes that we would like to see. A note of caution on this: it's going to be hugely competitive, both nationally within the sub-region and the region. But you can be assured that we are round the table trying to lever that resource into Warwickshire. In terms of the funding for the measures that are being implemented now, we know that in Warwickshire we've demonstrated to the DFT, Department for Transport, that we have legitimately spent our allocation of over £250,000. The schemes that we're implementing, they're going to cost more than that for the period of time that we expect them to be in place. So we know that this is going to be a hit on the council budget, as many aspects of the COVID response have been. But we're stepping up to that to make sure that where it's needed, we'll spend the money in the town centres. Beyond that, Councillor Fradley, on the point of the funding for more permanent schemes, the detail of how we access that through the reallocation of road space for cycling hasn't been made yet, but we'll be there ready to put in make our case. My concern about that would be that more of that money is a lot more likely to go to places with heavy public transport use, the city centres, the more urban areas. But notwithstanding that, we'll be there putting our bids in for Warwickshire.
Okay. Thank you very much for that answer. That was more or less, I suppose, what I was expecting. But I do think we need to be kept up to date with how that is going, and any pressure that we might be able to sort of bring to bear through our cycle forums and interested parties would be very useful.
Happy to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, next is Councillor Caroline Phillips, followed by Councillor Shilton. Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment on the white lines that we've got in the pedestrianised area. And I'm grateful for the work that has been done. It's been done very quickly to get the shops open. But moving forward, we've got these white lines going through the town centre to show the distancing. And can we use them? I'm just thinking ahead now. Can we use them for cycling, to allow cyclists to come into the pedestrianised areas in the future? Now that they're already down, could we use them?
Okay, Jeff, do you want to come back? Jeff, do you want to come back on that? And
Sorry,
your
I think
mic
Mark's
is off.
Mark's
Yeah,
going to give you
and
the technical response. As I say,
Jeff,
these
before you
arrangements-
start for the camera, can I ask you just to introduce yourself, sir?
Sorry,
Of what
Councillor
your
Jeff
portfolio-
Clark again. Sorry, Chair. Yeah, in response to
No,
that.
we know you are. I just want to know what your portfolio is. So.
Yeah. Cabinet Member for Transport and Planning in Warwickshire County Council. Just in relation to that, these schemes, as you pointed out, are government-led schemes. They are time limited. They have a sunset clause on them. So any measures that are put in will automatically end at the end of 18 months. Should we need to look or wish to look at other measures for either cycle lanes, pedestrian areas or whatever, we're happy to look at those as we move forward, but they would need to be done separately, not as part of this scheme, I'm afraid.
Okay, happy with that. Right, next I've got Councillor Shilton.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, mine's a bit of congratulations, actually, rather than all the down talking of what's been happening. I'd like to pass on our thanks to Mark, whoever it may be, and perhaps Izzy, to our thanks to Jo Edwards and her team, who have been working tremendously hard throughout the whole of this exercise and are still doing it. Tremendous pressure they've been under, and especially with Kenilworth. We've more or less got that sorted now, and it's already plans coming through today of what's actually happening. That's after the meeting we had on Wednesday. But I think we should say thank you to the team for the amount of work and time they're spending on these different initiatives. And I'm sure at the end of the day, we will get it right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do I have any other questions for portfolio holders? Yeah, I've got Keith, Councillor Kondaki coming back.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've changed my background to the walking route into Nuneaton so Jeff can see how poor it is at the moment. One positive thing has been this money for electric buses, which I hope we're going to get. Can we have an undertaking that will monitor the project carefully? Because when we've been working with Coventry in the past, things have slipped, like the Bay platform in Coventry. So can we have an update as to where we are with our electric bus bid and an undertaking that it will actually be monitored robustly so it doesn't slip and the Nuneaton parts of the project get dropped off the end? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm sure Jeff can give that understanding. Is there anybody else who wants to ask a question to a portfolio holder? No? Well, in that case, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda 4 is the West Midlands Railway Executive of West Midlands Trains. I'd like to thank them very much for attending today. Obviously, we asked them to our community overview and scrutiny committee because we had concerns about the service, and of course, since we've asked them, it's all been hijacked a bit by the world's changed by COVID-19. But thank you very much indeed. And so I don't know what order you want to take it in. You want to address the committee, but I've first got Malcolm Holmes, the Executive Director. So unless there's anything else you want to say, perhaps you'd like to start off, Malcolm.
Right, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I always welcome the opportunity to come and have a conversation with you and our other partner authorities about the work that we're doing. Now, I'm currently here in Sutton Coldfield, rural Sutton Coldfield, where the Wi-Fi is terrible. So I'm currently operating 2 devices with the hope that I'm able to continue conversing with you. So I'm going to put the slides onto one device, which hopefully you can now see, and then I'll be speaking to you through another. So the first thing I thought I'd do was just to clarify who we are. So the West Midlands Rail Executive is a partnership of local authorities from across the wider region. That includes Warwickshire County Council, and Councillor Seckham and Councillor Butlin are the board members that represent Warwickshire on the West Midlands Rail Executive, and our role is really as the de facto rail authority for the wider West Midlands, and to that end we work very closely with the Department for Transport over the management of the local rail operation, and our rail operators, of course, West Midlands Trains, and Johnny and Francis will be speaking with you in a moment. So we work hand in hand with DFT in managing the contract for the operation of our rail services. We also have a role in rail strategy for the region, as well as a host of other activities that are all relevant to rail. And in undertaking that work, we liaise very closely with officers in Mark's team on a day-to-day basis. So the partnership includes the 7 local transport authorities of the Shire and unitaries that surround the combined authority area, and also each of the individual 7 metropolitan districts. In order not to have the oddity of two rail authorities for the region, we also undertake the work, any rail work, of Transport for West Midlands as well. So it's all joined together and all linked up. And to that end, I'm also Director of Rail for Transport for West Midlands, but it's absolutely the same job, of course. So what I thought I'd do is I'll take you through a bit of an update about where we are with COVID-19 related activity, actions and impact, and then talk also a bit about some other matters that we're involved with, some of it with a link to COVID-19, some not, that are relevant to Warwickshire. So without further ado, the next thing I was going to cover really was a bit about the impact of COVID-19. I mean, the first thing to say is that since March, passenger numbers has plummeted hugely. There are only a fraction of the people that used to travel by rail and indeed on any transport mode. I'm sure you've seen the same in Warwickshire as there were before, and that has been consistent with government and local advice encouraging people to avoid public transport. Over the course of the last few weeks, we've been building the network up after it was cut right back in order to get ready for people returning to rail. And we've begun to see a bit of a rise, not a huge rise, but a bit of a rise in the number of people travelling by rail. Since the change in guidance at the beginning of this week, which was the introduction of face masks compulsorily on public transport and also the reopening of the shops, we've seen a further slight rise in public transport usage, but nothing dramatically. And as an example, New Street Station, which prior to COVID-19 would normally have around 200,000 passenger journeys passing through it a day, is still running at sort of 15 to 18,000, so substantially below where we otherwise would expect it to be, which at the moment is good, of course, because trying to deal with large crowds and a volume of people using the public transport could be extremely problematic. The rail network in the West Midlands at the moment is operating around 70% of what we were operating before in terms of the quantum of train services, with where possible maximum capacity being put out in order to ensure the maximum amount of space for travelling public. And I'll talk a little bit more in a moment about the volume of space that there is currently on trains for people to use. That will change again in the near future, with a further uplift coming in July, on the 6th of July, where we'll go up to around about 80% of capacity as we continue our march towards getting full rail capacity back out there again. In the West Midlands, as I'm sure you know, we have got a number of operators in the region, and part of the work that we do with the Rail Executive is encouraging and leading in terms of collaboration and bringing the rail industry together. And we do that through the West Midlands Ground Rail Collaboration, which consists of all of the 5 train operators in the region, Network Rail in a couple of its guises, ourselves as the Rail Authority for the West Midlands, and some other partners as well. And that group has been taking a bit of a lead with this in creating and leading a coordination group for the rail network for its response to COVID-19, and that's been effective in terms of sharing information and avoiding some duplication. Now, I mentioned reduced capacity on our train services. This table, which I won't go through in detail, summarises where what there is in terms of available capacity, given the need for 2 metre social distancing. And the column on the right really shows tells a story, which is that between 15 and 30%, depending on the train and the train service, is all that's available for passengers to use of what we'd expect to be providing, given the requirement for social distancing. I'm sure Johnny and Francis will talk a bit more about the rail industry response to COVID-19. Just briefly on timetables, again, similarly with the last slide, I won't bore you by going through it in detail, and certainly come back to it to respond to questions. But this is a summary of the train service that you're getting in Warwickshire at the moment. So on the Coventry corridor, we've got a pretty credible service actually, but with a slight reduction in service frequency on the route, and that in particular affects local stations. For the service running between Leamington and Nuneaton, that's actually the same as it would be without COVID-19. So that's running at 1 train an hour and running very reliably at the moment as well, as is the rest of the train service, which is really very, very good. And then looking to the Snow Hill line and the Stratford route, we've got 1 train an hour to Stratford, which is the same as it would normally get, and an additional service to Whitlock's End. So it's running at about 2/3 of the capacity that we would normally expect on that route. I think the big issue that we have in Warwickshire at the moment is the Chiltern Railway service. And at Warwick, you would normally expect to have 1 train an hour serving Birmingham and London, and an additional train every 2 hours serving Leamington and Birmingham as a stopping service. But because of the way they structured their COVID-19 temporary timetable, we've got their fast service operating, which is great for Warwick Parkway and for Leamington, but not so good for Warwick, and means that Warwick's only getting 1 train every 2 hours. So we have taken this up with Chiltern Railways at the most senior level, and we're looking for ways for them to resolve that as soon as we can. The rail industry has been required, and I'm sure that Johnny and Francis will talk about this a bit more, but required, as you'd expect, the same as the retail organisations, to put in social distancing measures. These are now visible and in place at stations across the region, very similar to what's been happening in the retail world, with a lot of signing, posters, floor markings, encouraging people to maintain social distancing. Particularly tricky with the public transport service, of course, and the big point of conflict there is when people are getting on and off trains. We're still a bit worried as to what happens when that happens in volume. At the moment, of course, with reduced passenger numbers, it's not too bad. But when there are a crowd of people waiting to get on the train and all socially distanced, waiting for people on the train who are also socially distanced to get off, that could cause some delay. I'll stop there talking about COVID-19 and move on to other matters relevant to Warwickshire. One of the areas that we've had a lot of activity going on recently is our engagement with Midlands Connect over the project that they call Birmingham Airport Connectivity. And this is about connecting the Thames Valley with Coventry, Birmingham Airport, and then onwards to Newcastle. Now, the criticality of this for Warwickshire is the bit of railway between Leamington and Coventry and its long-term capacity. And for those of you who have followed the story of this route for some time, particularly, of course, through the development of Kenilworth Station, will recall that much of the route is single line, and only 1 train can operate at any one time. And they're unable to pass. Now, this is really important when it comes to increasing long distance capacity. And Midlands Connect are working on an outline business case for a scheme to deliver a second cross country train each hour from the Thames Valley through to the northeast. Via Coventry and Newcastle. So there's 1 an hour that currently operates along that route, serving Coventry and Birmingham International, and there's an aspiration to create a second one of those, and that has a positive business case. However, and there is a but on that, is that in order to achieve that, all that requires is from Milverton, outside Leamington, Milverton Junction, to Kenilworth to be doubled, and not the section between Milverton Junction and and all the way to Gibbet Hill outside Coventry. And that's really important for us as Warwickshire, but also as the West Midlands Rail Executive, because just doubling the bit of railway between Milverton and Kenilworth does not provide sufficient capacity for us to improve the local service for Kenilworth and provide a second train an hour on that route, which is, I know, your aspiration and very much ours as well. So we've had a bit of a battle on this, and we've now reached some agreement with Midlands Connect and the DFT and Network Rail to commission an additional piece of work that assesses the benefits of running a second local rail service, which supports the case for the full doubling of that key route. It's interesting to reflect how that route, which was subject to or nearly closure actually, and then rationalisation of some of its infrastructure in decades past, has now become a really important bit of strategic infrastructure. And the additional Kenilworth station on there, and aspirations, of course, for a station serving Warwick University, mean that it's really important that we push the case for full doubling of that route. Also relevant to Warwickshire and of course the wider region is HS2, and quite a bit's been happening on HS2 over the course of the last few months. In particular, back in February, the notice to proceed, the formal sort of get on with it from government to HS2 Limited to start constructing phase 1 of HS2 was a really important milestone. And also then the publishing of the business case for the whole of HS2, which showed that in all but the most extreme of scenarios, it has a positive value for money. We are concerned about some of what's written in the business case, though, because it doesn't refer to northbound services under the first phase after the initial bit of HS2 going northwards, and there are huge benefits for the West Midlands for direct connectivity between the West Midlands and the northwest and Scotland, with some massive journey time savings. But the assumption currently is there are no such service being provided on HS2 infrastructure. So we're taking some action to raise awareness of that as well. There's a review underway by the National Infrastructure Commission, which you may well be familiar with. Indeed, you may have responded to, that we certainly responded to on behalf of the region. And as part of that, we stressed the importance of early introduction of direct services from the West Midlands heading north, as well as a number of other areas of significant importance to the region that we need HS2 to take due cognizance of. The final thing I will mention is the rail investment strategy, and the West Midlands Rail Investment Strategy, which is owned by the Rail Executive on behalf of the region, was published back in January last year, but it was always intended to be a live document and one that evolved with changes in the context we're operating in an external environment. And indeed, since January last year, of course, a huge amount has changed, not least very recently, of course, COVID-19 and its long-term impact on the economy and rail travel. And indeed, on that subject, I mean, I think we can expect that commuting and business travel will be changed in the long term as a consequence of COVID-19. I know from my own personal experience, having been introduced to the wonders of video technology, which I largely ignored and pretended didn't exist prior to COVID-19, it will certainly be changing the way that I work, commute, and undertake business travel in the future, and I'm sure I won't be alone in that. So we need to take cognizance of what impact there is on the rail travel market going forward. There have been changes to the delivery timescales for HS2 and some of the deliverables, and with our rail investment strategy being predicated on HS2, we do need to reflect those changes. In addition, strengthening of the decarbonisation agenda needs to come through more strongly in our rail investment strategies. It's also worth reflecting that since COVID-19, the rail network has performed incredibly well. We were struggling, and as the chair mentioned in my introduction, really, that when you initially asked us to come, it was because of poor performance of the rail network in Warwickshire. Well, since COVID-19, that period of poor performance has gone away, and instead of seeing performance numbers in the 70s and 80% on a good day, we're now routinely seeing them in the high 90s, and we absolutely want to see that continue into the long term. So the importance of maintaining performance needs to be considered within our rail investment strategy. So we're taking forward a review of this. We're using the same consultants we did before, SLC, who are familiar with Warwickshire, and indeed have done work with you on strategy before, and also the consultants Sistra, who did the economic modelling work. As previously, we will be working closely with officers from each of our partner authorities, including your officers here in Warwickshire, and also, of course, through the West Midlands Rail Executive Board with members. So that concludes a bit of a quick summary of what we've going on. I hope that was a relevant update, and of course, very, very happy to take any questions you may have.
Well, thank you very much, Malcolm. That was very interesting, and I've got 3 speakers at the moment, if you're happy to take them before we move on to your colleagues. The first one is Councillor Kadaka.
Thank you very much, Chair. The presentation seemed to ignore the bit of Warwickshire that's north of Coventry. We have a massive number of problems north of Coventry. The Bay platform's not happened in Coventry, which has really been a massive blow to improving our services. In your comments on the COVID resilience, no mention was made of Coventry, the Nuneaton, Coleshill, Birmingham services that seem not to exist in the minds of West Midlands Rail Executive, and are in fact very, very important for Nuneaton. But because they're an oddity, Nuneaton to Birmingham is always forgotten. We also have the issue of Knuckle 3 point whatever it is, bypassing Nuneaton in its idea of going from Coventry to Leicester and missing out Nuneaton, which would be a blow to Nuneaton. And on the HS2 work, there's a big question when HS2 phase 1 comes in of us losing all our what used to be Virgin services going up to the north in the peak hours. Nuneaton lost its Virgin service 10 years ago in the off-peak, and we now have just peak hours set downs and pickups. But they do provide us some connectivity to the north, and the only carrot dangled for HS2 was actually there'd be a trickle down, and effectively the services to Manchester or Liverpool, one of those would end up stopping at Nuneaton. Now it didn't need to be an express service, but the modelling for HS2 now seems to imply we keep our hourly stopping service, and then in the peak we just have another stopping service that only goes to Lichfield, effectively cutting us totally off from the north. The reason for that is HS2 comes in at Lichfield and uses a lot of capacity Lichfield northwards, but it's an absolute blow for our town, which is really in that crack between the East and West Midlands, and is totally forgotten by the rail authorities, both nationally and things like Midlands Connect, that is joining the big cities together and forgetting the massive opportunities we have at Nuneaton. 7 platform stations and everything just racing through without stopping. Thank you, Chair.
If you want to respond, Malcolm, before we move on, that would be helpful.
Yes, very happy to do so. So the Bay platform, you mentioned that earlier actually, and it prompted me to make a note to have a conversation with Colin Knight to find out where he is on that. So I haven't had any close involvement with that for some time. So I'll pick up where we are with that. I mean, that's a key bit of infrastructure that is going to enable the increased frequency between Coventry and Nuneaton that we're desperate to see. So I'll pick up that and chase it. I certainly don't ignore Nuneaton nor Nuneaton to Birmingham, and that subject, the subject of those services, is close to the forefront of my mind at the moment, because we're in discussion with DFT still about our ambition to take greater responsibility for the cross-country services that operate between Birmingham, Nuneaton and then onwards to Leicester and Stansted. And I'm certainly very keen that we get much more local involvement in those. Both that corridor and the corridor out to Tamworth and Burton are oddities in as much as they're provided by cross-country, who are a long-distance operator. As a consequence, therefore, they're outside of the old Centro area and consequently the fare zones as well. So they have suffered from insufficient capacity and also much higher prices, much higher fares that has existed across much of the west of the region. And we're very keen in the longer term to try to resolve that. So the work that we're currently doing on that route is seeking to get the services remapped away from cross-country, so the local service to Leicester, so that we're able to then grow and improve that service in the longer term. I'm very, very keen to see that happen. Coventry-Leicester connectivity, knuckle 3.1, I think it is, but I can't quite remember. That is with Midlands Connect, and that's being taken forward and has our support. And I know that there is work being undertaken on that, so that's still underway, and I think business cases are being developed on that. Post HS2 timetables, it's very much up for grabs. I mean, there's been various work done in outlining potential train service scenarios beyond HS2, but they're only indicative at this stage. And there's a lot more work that needs to be done. We're engaged with Network Rail on work looking to understand what that might look like. An example of some of the work that we've done has demonstrated that it is possible to maintain Coventry to London's sort of 3 trains an hour, which is very important to Coventry City Council. And in doing that, or the way that we do that is by having a train that comes off the Trent Valley, assumed to come from somewhere further north and beyond Lichfield, that then comes via from Nuneaton via Bedworth, although not calling it Bedworth, to Coventry and then fast to London. So very much conscious of that opportunity to improve connectivity from Coventry and Nuneaton going further north after HS2, and that is very, very important. So hopefully that answers each of those questions, Chair.
If I may just come back, Chair, just
one more question, Keith.
Yeah, just on that point of diverting a service through Coventry up to Nuneaton and then up to North, that would require the line being electrified or having a real oddity of a diesel train just for that little 6, 7, 8 mile set stretch. And yeah, we need a lot of these things sorted out. And I understand things from the melting pot, but we really need someone shouting for the Nuneaton services. We're the most employed part of Warwickshire, and a good long distance service to the north would really help us.
Okay, I'm sure Malcolm will take that on board. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the traction type, of course, Avanti West Coast are procuring a fleet of bi-mode trains that operate with electric and diesel power. So actually, that's rather opportune because that would be ideal for that service, even without electrification. So.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next, I've got Dave Shilton, who would like to ask a question. Councillor Shilton.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank you for some very positive dialogue there, especially with the twin tracking side between Milverton and Kenilworth. But don't forget, we've got a single track that runs from Crackley right the way through to Coventry as well, because the old track, which is now a greenway, which used to go on start of the Birmingham line. So I don't know if you're going to take anything on that, but well done. It's in the pipeline, and we await to see it. I hope you're successful with that. Right, back to my important one though. Kenilworth Station has been such a great success since it's been reinstated there and reopened. The only difficulty we had was when the trains were not running. It came back to the public and everyone else that it was because of staff shortages, drivers, guards, etc. Now, that is not acceptable. What can you assure us with that type of situation won't happen again? Because people were waiting on the stations at Nuneaton and Leamington and particularly Kenilworth for a long, long time. My final point, is there any chance now this COVID's on that you can actually put an extra carriage on at least to get that amount of people up slightly from 38 to say 50? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Malcolm.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Shelton. These are two questions actually, probably best directed to West Midlands Trains, but I will give you my perspective from the rail executive, and also consistent with our relationship with the Department for Transport. So, in terms of performance before COVID-19 and train crew shortages, this was a problem that WMT were grappling with for some time. The result of that was the publication of a contractually committed remedial plan between West Midlands Trains and the Department for Transport that required West Midlands Trains to solve that issue. Part of that was by recruiting a significant number more train crew in order to provide resilience. Now, that work has progressed. But COVID-19 has got in the way and has had an impact on the ability to train drivers given social distancing, not only in the classroom but also in driving cabs, of course. So a number of measures are being put in place to A, accelerate that, but also B, mitigate the impact of that. Because as I said previously, none of us want to go back to the poor performance that we had before and want to see a reliable train service. So I am, from what I'm hearing from West Midlands Trains, I'm confident that we're not going to go back to that. We're making sure that the train service that is now being advertised can be delivered reliably and consistently, and that includes the service for Kenilworth Station. And absolutely understand the frustration of people waiting on the platform for a train that isn't going to come with the same reason given time and time again. In terms of capacity, this is a difficult trade-off, of course. I mean, we've got more capacity on that route than we used to have, with the 2-car train now being used rather than the 1-car train that used to be used on that route. Much more modern train as well, which is far, far better. But it's a trade-off between providing capacity for the Leamington to Coventry and Nuneaton route versus providing capacity elsewhere to any finite amount of rolling stock. West Midlands Trains may have some additional to add to that, but I wouldn't want to promise today that we'll be able to increase capacity on that route at this time.
Just one final thing, Alan.
If you want to come back, Councillor Shelton, one more question if you want.
Very quickly, you mentioned the university point there, and I think that is important also, because the amount of students now living in Leamington, and they'll be living in Kenilworth as well, Nuneaton no doubt, and it's a big university and doing a lot of business. So, there's a lot of people employed. So the better service we can rely on there as well will stop a lot of the people who are using cars going to the university. Of course, the buses are chock-a-block, but at the moment they're empty. But any information on that would be very, very grateful.
Yeah, I've been involved in conversations on this, so happy to give a quick update on this. Now, it's not something that's going to be possible in the short term for the reasons I've given over line capacity. I think it's important to manage expectations around that. If we were to introduce, if we were to build a station now and introduce that service today, it would have a detrimental impact on operating performance that would then send delays across the country. So I don't think it's something we're able to do in the short term. But in terms of the strategic intent, I think it's absolutely spot on. And I've been fortunate enough to be involved in conversations involving Warwickshire County Council with Monica, with Coventry City Council, the LEP, and also, of course, the university. On developing the ambition to put a railway station serving Warwick University in support of their long-term development plans and transport plan. So absolutely support the intention. It will appear in our rail investment strategy in the longer term, and it's something that we do need to work towards. I think it'd be great to do that, but we will need more line capacity in order to do it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. The next councillor is Councillor John Holland, who'd like to ask a question. John.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for a very interesting talk. And I certainly agree with Councillor Shilton that we will all support double track between Leamington and Coventry. And that's something we need. And I know our MP, Matt Weston, for Warwick and Leamington, has been involved in talks about links with Leamington and Warwick University. But the railway doesn't actually go to the university. However, coming on to a more strategic issue, we in Warwickshire are about to sign off our rail strategy in full council, probably at the next meeting. And we've had local plans from our 5 districts and borough councils, which have agreed a really massive increase in house building in Warwickshire. And the number of people living in Warwickshire is going to increase absolutely enormously. We really can't see that rail use can support these new developments, and that the people moving into the new houses will have little choice but to use cars. Now, for the county council, we've got several policies. Climate change is a concern to us. Public health, public transport is seen as a way of reducing avoidable illnesses and avoidable deaths, because people also take exercise. So the county council would like rail use to meet the needs of this very, very big increase in number of people. But you didn't mention it, and we can't see a way. It would need a quite substantial new building of new lines, which would be a lot more use than HS2. Do you have any comments?
I mean, my only comments on that is in principle to agree. I mean, I would, given my job and my passion, I would love to see a much bigger network of new rail routes in the West Midlands and to serve the growth of the region. And across the wider region, we're going to see huge growth in population. But the focus for us at the moment, without a huge injection of additional cash, is going to be ensuring that we get the best out of our existing rail network, so the rail network that we've got is working as best it can to serve the needs of the region, including Warwickshire. And a good example of that is Leamington to Coventry, where some investment, and it will be a couple of £100 million worth of investment to double that, to redouble that railway. And in some parts of it, actually double it for the first time ever. It was never fully doubled. Will then allow us to better serve Kenilworth and then to open a station for Warwick University. So the priority at the moment is making sure that we're getting the best out of the rail network that we've got. But I absolutely share, from a personal level, your ambition to increase the use of rail far wider than that. I would absolutely love to see that. I think it's a great mode of transport, but of course it's not the only mode of transport, and it's about making sure that we've got the right, we're using, and your panels will be absolutely thinking this is about making sure we've got the right transport modes supporting the right communities.
Do you have a follow-up question, John?
Yeah, just quickly. I absolutely agree with that. Getting the best out of what we've got is obviously a priority, and I'm pleased to hear that. We are now in the biggest crash in the economy in my lifetime, and when we've had financial crashes in the past, the County Council, in 1987, the County Council made a substantial investment in Warwickshire, which was very successful. We've got later on our agenda recovery plans. Might it be an idea if the railway industry came up with some big plans, not as grandiose as HS2, but perhaps more useful to local people, because this might be just the time when the public sector is seeking to invest. We've been briefed to expect 20% unemployment in Warwickshire. That we need to take action, and it needs some big schemes, and you might be just the person.
I'd be very happy to have a conversation about that, and indeed the point you make about investment following economic decline is relevant in rail terms to Warwickshire and this bit of the region, because the Great Western Railway, after the Depression, were paid to make the 2-track railway 4-track through to Birmingham Moor Street. and that was a consequence of our economic growth. So I'll be very happy to have a conversation on that. Certainly, what we are feeding into government to support that economic growth agenda are schemes that are already being worked up. So Midlands Rail Hub, which increases capacity into central Birmingham, which would have a positive impact on services in Warwickshire, including from places such as Coleshill and Nuneaton, is a key part of that. Coventry to Nuneaton Leicester is part of that, as indeed is the Kenilworth line and Leamington to Coventry doubling. But very happy to consider where else we may direct our lobbying effort. I think it's also worth, I should have added in answer to your question initially, Councillor Holland, that the Warwickshire Rail Investment Strategy, of course, forms a key part of what informs the West Midlands Rail Investment Strategy overall. I mean, it's an umbrella strategy that seeks, where possible, to incorporate the needs of each of its constituent parts. It's not always possible to do that because, of course, sometimes there are conflicts and trade-offs. But we seek, where possible, to make sure that we are inclusive of all the desires and aspirations of our partner authorities.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Councillor Jeff Clark.
Thank you, and welcome, Malcolm. Thank you very much for that presentation. I think it was really helpful and useful to give an overview of where we're at in relation to Warwickshire and the West Midlands. I appreciate the commitment that you mentioned there in relation to Coventry, Nuneaton, Leicester, to ensure that Nuneaton is part of that programme as we move forward. That's really essential that we have that connectivity, as Keith pointed out. And also the Birmingham-Leicester line, as you probably appreciate, is quite a busy line, but has opportunity to call it Nuneaton and service Nuneaton for that cross link down to the southeast, which would help. What I would like to say is that obviously Warwickshire is very keen on promoting rail growth. We're creating new stations, hopefully at Warwick, for a Warwick Parkway type of thing for the university there, Rugby, and possibly with the Galley Common as well on the Birmingham Nuneaton link. And finally, and I know it's not actually under your remit, and we are working with with Network Rail, but your support for northern access, pedestrian access for Nuneaton station would be very much appreciated as well at this time. But any assistance that you can give, particularly in relation to provision of services and across the piece. And I understand, it's a large chunk across Warwickshire, and your area doesn't particularly cover all of it, but any help within that your organisation it would be much appreciated, and the support for Warwickshire to develop our services again would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, we're going to respond to that, but I mean, absolutely take that as read. Warwickshire are. I did some work in a previous life working for a rail consultancy with Warwickshire, working on bits of your rail strategy and also Kenilworth Station and so on. And you are, as an authority, one of the most proactive when it comes to developing rail, and we absolutely support your aims. And each of the schemes you've just listed, I have no hesitation at all in supporting those. The Birmingham-Leicester route is interesting, actually, because it is very important. It hasn't got enough capacity, it's too expensive, and it's excruciatingly slow. I live part of my life in Leicestershire, actually, doing stuff outside of work, so I do use that line from reasonably frequently, or did before COVID-19. And it's painfully slow for the distance. And those cross regional links into the East Midlands need to be made much better. That includes, of course, Coventry to Leicester as well, whether or not it calls at Nuneaton. Those cross regional links are very important. So absolutely, without hesitation, support all of that. And anything that we can do directly, if we're not proactively doing it, anything that you need us to do through your officers to express support to that, please do let us know.
Okay, happy with that. Okay, the next speaker, the next speaker is Councillor Peter Butlin. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Just kind of an observation. I've just come from the West Midland kind of Combined Authority Strategic Economic Development Board, and they're putting a lot of plans together in terms of kind of economic regeneration post-COVID, and we're setting our stalls out there in terms of, one, there's going to be almost certainly an awful lot of capital stimulus from the central government. And we are kind of looking towards kind of making a case for a considerable spend on infrastructure, which will almost certainly include West Midland Rail. So I'm hopeful that with that stimulus package, and if we set our stall out correctly, we can be part of that growth to get jobs back into the region. In terms of what John Holland was saying, in terms of further growth on the rail network, I'm pretty sure if we kind of do this proper and we're aware of the amount of capital that's going to be pumped into the economy, then we can take advantage of that. Bearing in mind, the West Midlands is kind of a considerable driver of the economy of this country. I think we've got a good case to make. The other thing is Warwickshire has always been a pro rail authority. I had that ambition to open 3 railway stations, and I managed to do it. So lines are a part. We've got new lines, even if it's double tracking the Leamington to Coventry line, which we've always recognised as integral to getting those more frequent services. So that's very, very important to us in Warwickshire. So I keep my fingers crossed and hopeful there'll be a lot of capital coming our way. So, thanks for the inputs from Malcolm there.
Pleasure.
Councillor Kandaki, you wanted to come back, I believe.
Just a quick point. What Malcolm said, whether or not the service from Coventry to Leicester stops at Nuneaton, I really wanted to emphasise it will be a political battle to actually get a line built at great expense that didn't serve such an important town as Nuneaton, and the MP and everyone needs to be fighting to make sure we're not missing out on that marvellous opportunity.
Okay, actually, Malcolm, I do have a question of my own, and that is that when the business case for Kenilworth Station came up about 7 or 8 years ago, it was always going to be a twin track between Leamington and Coventry, and that happened because there were plans for the electrification of all the lines in the Midlands, and that was kicked into the long grass about 5 years ago. Do you think they'll ever be resurrected?
Yes, I do. And of course, I was actually closely involved with the Kenilworth project myself at the time that happened as part of the Henley review. And of course, the intention at the time was to build it with 2 platforms, and the designs were rapidly changed so that it's now it was built with passive provision for the second platform to be built. And of course, the track was slewed over; it was moved so that the one platform that does exist has the track pretty much in the right place, ready for doubling in the future. So I think it will happen. Yes, I mean I do. And even if we don't achieve the full double tracking of that route, that we need to run 2 trains an hour for the local service, I think there's a strong enough case to ensure that we get the second long distance service an hour across that route in the future, which will require doubling through Kenilworth. So I think ultimately that will happen, but we do need to push, I think, for the full doubling of that route to ensure that we're able to increase the local service as well. Will electrification come? That I'm less clear on, and the appetite for pushing electrification sort of goes in ebbs and flows. At the moment, we're on a bit of an up about it at the moment. I think there's recognition that that is the way forward. There are alternative traction means that are coming, such as the use of hydrogen and so on. But I still don't think that they are going to be quite as good as full-scale electrification. They will have some application, but they won't replace full electrification. So I think ultimately we'll see that as well.
Yeah.
Might be maybe a few years though.
Yeah. Well, Malcolm, can I thank you profusely for coming today and explaining the thinking of West Midlands Railway, and it's been you've answered all our questions quite comprehensively. I've next got one of your colleagues, Johnny Wiseman, who's the Customer Experience Director for West Midlands Trains, to talk to us now. So, Johnny, over to you.
Good afternoon. Francis is going to load up the slide deck, and halfway through I'm going to hand over to him. But whilst he's doing that, if I could just introduce myself. I'm Johnny Wiseman. I've worked in the rail industry for just over 16 years, a number of different train companies, and also at Stagecoach in the centre doing some rail business development work. Most recently, I was the Customer Experience Director for London North Western, which is half of West Midlands Trains. And when Richard Brooks retired earlier this year, I was delighted to come across to pick up the post in the West Midlands, and was starting to really enjoy getting around the network, looking at all the issues, meeting the people, stakeholders, customers, staff. And we've had a little bit of a bump in the road because coronavirus has arrived, and I will touch on that a little bit in my presentation. It came up whilst Malcolm was talking during some of the questions. None of us want to repeat a year like last year. We let customers down. We had a timetable that was undeliverable. It was too complicated. It added layers of complexity that were not needed, and it unearthed all sorts of historical issues relating to the number of train crew in this franchise that has gone back a number of years. What we have in place now is an exec team that's changed beyond all recognition since the end of last year. Julian has joined as a new managing director, and including Julian and myself, out of the 10 directors, 7 are either new to the company or new in post since last year. And as Malcolm touched on, we have a remedial plan in place to look at fixing some of the underlying issues that led to some of the timetable problems last year, where we saw unreliability become the norm. One of the positives that we need to take from coronavirus is it has allowed us to put in a timetable that works extremely effectively, running day in, day out in the mid to high 90s. It will get impacted as customers start to return, but it has given us a roadmap of what can actually be achieved. When we move to a business as usual timetable in the future, we've been having conversations with West Midlands Rail Executive, Department for Transport and other stakeholders about how we can make sure we keep the benefits of the kind of timetable we're operating at the moment, and have a timetable that meets the demand and the capacity, the frequency requirements, but also allows us to operate it with the right number of train crew so that we don't go back to those dark days of last year. Okay, if we could move into the presentation proper, Francis, to the first slide. Kenilworth, I watched this from afar, and for me this is a really good news story, not just for Warwickshire and the West Midlands, but also for the rail industry. This is a really good example about bringing train stations back to life in very innovative ways. Despite the issues with the timetable from last year, footfall has increased year on year and ticket sales have increased. It will take time for a new train station to bed in regardless. Unfortunately, we've had the additional hiccup of coronavirus completely decimating train travel. Francis, if you can move to the next slide, please. Before I get into the coronavirus stuff proper, we've been working very closely with the tenants at Kenilworth to make sure they've been included in all our social distancing measures and other coronavirus mitigation things that we're doing. And they're now open for business with a Perspex sneeze screen in operation. And the head of communities, Faye Easton, has been working with them about how to develop and grow the business further and take advantage of some of the through traffic that's coming through the station. Next slide, thanks, Francis. So we actually moved to a reduced timetable on the 23rd of March in line with the rest of the rail industry. We saw an absolute decimation of our customer numbers through the middle weeks in March. We've seen a very slight upturn since, but nothing spectacular. That timetable saw roughly 50% of the normal capacity, and we, on the 18th of May, moved to a timetable that was more like 60%, and in a couple of weeks we moved to a ramped up timetable again. When we moved to the initial emergency timetable, like everyone else, we didn't know how far and wide coronavirus was going to spread and what kind of impact that was going to have on our colleagues. Likewise, Network Rail were nervous about how they were going to continue to operate the infrastructure. Our worst fears probably were not realised, but we still have had a significant number of colleagues who have self-isolated over the last 3 months. And we also have a relatively older workforce, and we have a significant number of colleagues who are shielding. But we're pleased to say the number of self-isolators at the moment is down in the mid-20s, which is a really good place to be in. And we've been able to operate every iteration of the timetable. Next slide, please, Francis. So some of the things that we did initially were an immediate ramping up of cleaning, both to kill the virus on hard surfaces, but also to retain customer confidence. We have been improving communication around contactless payments and online payments. Our ticket offices have remained open throughout the lockdown, as have all our other station provided facilities, not tenants, but things like gate lines have remained in operation. We have worked really hard to communicate with customers and stakeholders that Francis will touch on in the second half of the presentation. Also internally with our colleagues across the wider rail industry as well. One of the things that we've had to balance very carefully is speed of action in doing things to put in social distancing or amended timetables, but also going in step with everyone else so that customers don't get confused and that we don't get ahead of the changing guidance. It's just something that everyone's had to deal with this in their own way. The guidance has obviously evolved, and we've worked with colleagues. I think Malcolm touched on the group across the West Midlands, not just train companies, but all transport operators, to make sure that we're as joined up as we can be, and that we're also learning from each other, because we've all found ourselves in very new territory. Next slide, please, Francis. I won't dwell on this too much, but it's in your pack and it gives you some statistics about some of our customer communications. We have had face mask posters up for a number of months, even though it wasn't mandatory at the time. We saw the direction of travel. Where possible, we've not mentioned the 2 metre mark. Obviously, this is something that the government will have to advise on in due course, but at some point we expect social distancing distance to be reduced, and we're ready to go. And where we do reference 2 metres, we'll be able to change over very quickly. Thank you, Francis. Some of the practical measures that we've put in place are perspex screens to divide ticket vending machines, likewise at multi-ticket locations. We've put a lot of social distancing measures in behind the scenes so that staff can still take breaks and operate facilities. You'll see across the whole network lots of floor markings, additional signage, announcements, and these have been supported through digital techniques as well. We have continued to ramp up the number of cleaners that we have, and have got some additional agency cleaners in to support the ramp up of customers. And we have also had a lot of management volunteers out this week giving out face coverings to people as it became mandatory to use them on trains for the first time. From experience in Birmingham on Monday and Tuesday, I'd say over 95% of the travelling public have chosen to wear face masks on trains off their own back. We will be out giving more face masks away from the 6th of July when the timetable ramps up again. Thank you, Francis.
I think that comes across to me. So one of the key things we've needed to do from the day one is to get a good, strong public information campaign to raise awareness of the importance of social distancing on rail. And we haven't done that alone, as Johnny has indicated. We've worked with the West Midlands Combined Authority, Transport for the West Midlands, the Grand Rail Collaboration, and the Metro Mayor. And we've, of course, worked with the Department for Transport and our industry umbrella organisation, the Rail Delivery Group. It's a much hackneyed phrase in railways that we sometimes say that we need to act as one railway working together. But right from the get-go on coronavirus, we took this to our hearts and said, we absolutely need to give consistent messaging to the public in a way that we haven't done since the days of nationalisation, to make sure that wherever you went, whether you were catching a train, maybe you came into Coventry on a cross-country train, you were getting on a West Midlands Railway train to Birmingham, only to catch an Avanti train to go further north. You needed to have that same consistent experience, that same messaging. But also we recognised that a lot of the thinking that we were doing within West Midlands Trains was quite advanced at an early stage, and we were keen to drive not just public policy, but also that common communications approach. And we have generated around, well, I totted it up yesterday knowing I was going to be talking to you today, over 220 national radio, TV and local radio and TV pieces since the start of coronavirus. In fact, we've reached something in the last month, we've reached half the population of England with our communications campaign, some 24 million people. We've also put stakeholders right at the heart of what we've been doing. We've produced 2 special editions of our stakeholder newsletter. We call it the West Midlands Trains Business Update. It's available on our website, and if members of this select committee or other members of the County Council would like to join the mailing list, we can arrange that for you. We've welcomed the opportunity to present to Overview and Scrutiny committees. Johnny and I did a similar presentation to Birmingham City Council a couple of weeks ago. We've started virtual MP briefings, and that's gone down really well. And we have kept our rail user groups informed. We have a stakeholder equality group, so those with additional travel needs have not been ignored during this crisis. And we've reached out to local employers and business through the CBI, through bids and CBDs to give them special briefings as well. And we've partnered with organisations like Visit Liverpool and Birmingham City Council with videos and podcasts so that we can extend the reach of our messaging so that people know exactly what to expect when they come onto rail. And this is just an example of some of the collateral that we've done through our paid for media in order to get the message across. Wearing face coverings, necessary journeys only. Both Johnny and his opposite number for London North Western have been producing customer videos. We've been encouraging people to travel at quieter times. We've even produced downloadable packs that people who are stuck at home with their children can get off our websites to keep their children entertained. And we've used testimonials from our frontline staff to really get the message across. What do we do next? Well, as Johnny has indicated, we have been gradually increasing the timetable into the middle of May in anticipation of more people returning to rail. And at the moment, we are coping well with social distancing because we're simply not carrying anything like the amount of traffic we would normally. Up until a week ago, we were carrying maybe 5-6% of our normal traffic. With the opening of shops this week, it's creeping up to around about the 9.5%. If social distancing becomes a problem when 20% is the norm. So we are developing a red, amber, green advice system that we will provide to our passengers. Green would be, as it is now, social distancing is working and there's plenty of room on the trains. Amber would be, well, social distancing is starting to prove difficult. You may have to wait at stations. We've risk assessed every one of our stations. We've put in extra queuing measures and extra social distancing measures. You may have to wait. You may not get the train of your choice. Red is where you really don't want to be, and that's social distancing has broken down, and we may have to express trains to destinations and actually tell some people that the stations are closed, or they might have to wait a very long time before they can get back onto the rail network. So by continuing with the messaging that we have, that it's necessary journeys only, and to encourage people to travel in less popular times, we hope we can keep in the green zone and only occasionally go to the amber. But having that information tool before 6th of July is the key, and we're testing that out at the moment, because social distancing will be with us for the foreseeable future, even with changes to regulations and easing of lockdown. Social distancing hasn't gone away, so the need for us to keep communicating is absolutely key. And the messages we have out there right now are to encourage people to travel at quieter times, allow extra time, because if you haven't been on a railway station in the last 5 to 10 weeks, then you will see things are very different. Of course, that face covering message, washing your hands, is still a priority. We're encouraging people to buy tickets online, and we've made it easier for people to get refunds online. That way you don't have to spend cash in stations, you don't have to spend as much time in stations. But come back to that core message, necessary journeys only. Chair, I'll stop there, and I'm sure Johnny and I'd be happy to take questions.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Francis. In fact, you didn't give me the opportunity to introduce you to Francis Thomas, Head of Corporate Affairs for West Midlands Trains. Anyway, thank you very much indeed. Do we have any questions for these two gentlemen? I can't see any. I think perhaps Malcolm had answered most of the queries that we had. So can I thank all three of you for coming along today and give us a very full and explanation of where you are now. Obviously, times have changed very quickly in the last 3 months, and you seem to be ahead of the game. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Right. Well, the next item on the agenda is the County Council COVID-19 recovery approach, and Mark Ryder is going to introduce this this major item that's going to affect how we deal with the recovery. Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief in introduction and very happy to take any questions from the committee. I mean, really, what this paper does, it builds on the cabinet paper that cabinet approved earlier in the month, and it really sets out an approach and a direction of travel for recovery. And I suppose what I would say is that there's three main things I want to point out. The first thing is that recovery is at various spatial levels, and by that I mean there's ourselves as an organisation, there's working locally, there's working sub-regionally, regionally and nationally, and all that sort of spider's web, if you like, of interactivity makes it a very complicated set of issues to grapple with and progress to be made, but absolutely essential that we think on all those levels, because when you think about, whether that's about transport, and we just heard from West Midlands Trains, whether that's about the wider economy, it's critical that Warwickshire engages on all those levels with our key partners. So that's the first point I would make. The second one is about the phasing and the recovery. We've had this huge response activity, which all parts of the county council, you've seen for yourselves about how the response has been managed. And subtly now, over the last month or so, that's really starting to have a more major look at the recovery phase. And I think for simplicity and the ability to actually think this thing through, we're thinking of the recovery phase in three. And one is about the foundation, and that's includes things like what's the next steps in standing up our own services, what are those, how do we work with the immediate concerns of local businesses. Then we move into a consolidation phase and onto acceleration. So activity is really sort of categorized across those. That's really a period of time which has been divided into three. And the third, and perhaps the more accessible part of the paper, is about the themes in which we're considering recovery. And they're in the paper, and of course you'll know that there will be sort of cabinet member led groups that lead these themes, which was one of the decisions made by our cabinet earlier in the month. And the themes are around place, economy and climate, which is really central to the agenda of this committee, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest in that. The second one is community and voluntary sector. The third is health, wellbeing and social care. And the fourth is about our own organisation and about how we recover, including the reinstatement of our services. So I just wanted to really, I think it's on here today, Chair, to field any questions or concerns that the committee might have in response to this, in the way that we're dealing with recovery. But I hope that at least sets out a kind of direction of travel and, if you like, a framework for how we're going to engage in the recovery piece. And I'll leave it there. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm very pleased to see this paper. I think that as we come out of the lockdown, that the County Council needs to show leadership, because it is one of the largest employers in the county. And I think this is just ticks all the right boxes. So thank you very much. I've got some speakers, and the first one is Councillor John Holland. John.
Sorry, just unmuting. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. I think that the document you produced is very carefully thought through. It's realistic, it's achievable, and all of us just need to get behind it. I think that the scale of the problem that we're going to be facing could be vast, and that we're going to need some fairly major thinking to move forward. But if we perhaps try and fix some targets on performance indicators such as unemployment, I think that would help focus people's minds to the scale of the task. But otherwise, well done, and thank you very much.
Okay, the next speaker is Councillor Kandaka. Keith?
Thank you, Chair. One of the big things we're going to have to do is rebuild various economies, and the tourism industry might be an opportunity, particularly with people staying in the UK and going into next year, potentially having City of Culture. Is all that stuff starting to get replanned and getting back up to working out how we're going to get integrated into what Coventry's doing? Because obviously, Coventry may push some of its cultural events back to later in 2021, but we do want to actually get the economic benefit, hoping COVID is over then, and taking part in the City of Culture. And the second part is we've also got a massive opportunity for people holidaying in the UK. We've got country parks, canals, history. We've just had a lot of people looking at a statue of George Eliot in the middle of Nuneaton over the last few days and connecting George Eliot with Nuneaton. And so there must be a tourism opportunity for 2021, which we should start to be looking at very soon. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I can come back on that, Chair.
Yes, please do.
In response, I would say that tourism is fundamental in this. It's certainly been seen as, in terms of the hit that tourism has taken, Warwickshire has felt the full brunt of that. And I know that in Stratford District, in some of the early analysis of the impact of COVID, was seen as one with the greatest net decline in terms of turnover and financial impact on business. The visitor economy is a central theme to the recovery effort, both sub-regionally, working with the local enterprise partnership and recognised by them, as well as regionally too. I know that within the West Midlands Recovery Plan, which we're fully engaged with, tourism is a factor on that. So it certainly hasn't slipped our sights that in terms of a sector-based approach to working with various sectors in a way that can make a difference, very much centre stage. And I don't know whether, I know Dave's on the call, I don't know whether, Dave, whether you want to add any more in terms of the sort of tourism question.
Okay, yep. If you want to come in there, Dave.
Happy to.
Just introduce yourself, David.
Yeah, so Dave Aiton-Hill, Assistant Director for Communities. So yeah, as Mark has alluded, we're very, very well aware of the significant impact that the hospitality and leisure sector has had through this COVID-19 crisis, and not the inability at the moment to reopen and to get their businesses moving again, which is having a substantial impact on those local businesses. So yes, we have flagged it as a key sector we're working on. We're working with the industry and the sector bodies to think around how we support those businesses coming out of it, and absolutely that focus on domestic tourism is a real opportunity. And what we're helping businesses, local tourism businesses, do is rethink their marketing and communications plans and their sort of targets, the business targets around domestic tourism as an opportunity, and particularly rural tourism, because the expectation is more isolated rural areas are likely to have stronger demand than city-based or town-based tourism breaks. So we're trying to work with those sectors and with those businesses to think how they reposition their markets, because some of them are focused on overseas markets, and clearly that's not appropriate at the moment. So yeah, there's a whole body of work going on to work with the sector to think about how we support that. On the City of Culture issue, as you say, a real opportunity. I know they are reviewing their plans as we speak and looking at contingency measures as to what that might look like, and they're looking at a range of options, from starting slightly later in the year, so actually having a programme running from April 2021 to March 2022 instead of the calendar year, and other options around running it over a shorter period in 2021, and or running it as it was, because hopefully the issues would have mitigated by then. But yes, we're working closely with City of Culture on that as well, to work out their plans and how that can feed back into our local tourism sector.
Okay, well, I've got no other questions, Mark, but actually this is in very early days, isn't it? We're going to have a four cross-party working groups, which would involve a lot of members to be working on how we're going to progress in this, and that has to be really done by the end of July. And I know that's for a report to go to Cabinet in September. Is that the way forward?
Yep, that's right. The target there is the September cabinet, and in the meantime, those meetings will be those groups will be established. And I know, for example, on the economy one, I believe that we've got our first meeting late June or very early July. I know that's been scheduled now, so the work really is going to start ramping up with that member leadership and engagement.
Yeah. Actually, getting back to the economic development update, Dave, it's interesting. How much money has the council been sort of delivering as a vehicle? Really, I know a lot of it's from the government, but giving it to businesses, it must be quite an incredible sum for Warwickshire.
Yeah, I mean, most of the economic response funds, in this emergency phase, has come from central government, either directly through their sort of their finance support packages, or indirectly through banks, or via grants via the district and borough councils with the rate-paying authorities. We've totted it up for Warwickshire, actually, in terms of all the different schemes: the grants, the business rate holidays, job retention scheme, the Corona business interruption loan scheme, the bounce back loan scheme. And we think it's about £800 million of government funding that has gone into Warwickshire, and this is just Warwickshire alone, economy, to support businesses in this stage. So I mean, that's the scale of the sort of the level of support that's going in at the moment. And I suppose part of our considerations in economic recovery is, at some point, that 800 million is going to be withdrawn, isn't it? The job retention scheme is going to be phased out. Businesses are going to have to start thinking about how they're going to stand on their own 2 feet. And so we need to think about how the public sector and our partners step in and taper off that support package that government have put in, but do it in a way that, as Mark was saying, is focused on that kind of future growth of the economy and the acceleration phase. Because what we're here to do is try and get that economy back up and running and bring it back better, stronger, greener, more productive, more competitive. So that's where our focus will be. But yeah, huge amount of money going into the economy at the moment.
Well, that's a huge challenge. But of course, Warwickshire economy is in a very strong position before COVID-19, and that's which obviously is going to help a lot. So yes, I wish. Let's hope a fair wind is behind us. Okay, any more questions? If there are no more questions, I'd like to move on with the agenda. And thank you very much, David and Mark, for presenting that.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, the next item is the school safety zones and routes, a concluding report, and I believe Councillor Fradgley has agreed to introduce this. So, Jenny.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I actually have been a member of the reconstituted Safer Routes to School. I wasn't there at the beginning. I actually came in probably 3/4 of the way through, and I just happened to chair the last wind-up meeting of that group. And can I say thank you very much to the officers for pulling together this really quite brief, but I hope very successful report of the successes of that group since 2015. As this was being wound up, there was a very strong feeling among the people around the table that this job isn't quite finished yet, and that we should be looking at how to get children or parents to leave the cars at home, to get children to be able to walk to school, and cut down on air pollution, health agendas, and many other things. I think the climate change agenda plus COVID-19 are actually both playing into this sense of setting up a task and finish group that should look at the costs of actually setting up walk to school programs with as many schools as we can. It's quite a short brief. It's to report back, I think it's in February 2021. So it'd be quite a chunky but rapid piece of work to bring back recommendations from schools as how we could move forward on this. Thank you.
Well, I think the report's very timely because, with the situation we're in at the moment, there obviously must be a lot of interest in that. So, and I believe we will be putting together a working group, and I know that from our group, Dave Shilton has agreed to stay in it. Anyway, the first speaker I've got is Councillor Kandaka. Keith.
Thank you very much. In the report, it mentions pedestrian crossings, which are really, really important. For example, in my ward, we lost a school crossing patrol, and we still haven't got a pedestrian crossing in there. I do think we need to revisit this PV squared and the discussions over when we can have crossings. We have the money put aside from our delegated budgets to get a crossing, and it is just not happening. And making roads go slower near schools, making the crossings more attractive, and stopping these roads being barriers to people crossing is really important. And the economic growth and the housing growth in Warwickshire, particularly like in Nuneaton and Bedworth, where we've got the housing in the north, has actually made roads more and more of a barrier for people cycling and walking. So I really think we need to review the provision of crossings, because it is ridiculous that we haven't got crossings in where the funding is available. Secondly, we really do need to be looking at 20-mile-an-hour zones far more widely. All my primary schools are currently in 30-mile-an-hour zones. None of them are really needing to be in 30-mile-an-hour zones. When the schools are about to close and there's half hour of parents queuing outside and really, really serious health and safety problems. And I really do think we need to get a 20-mile-an-hour culture in the environments of these schools and hopefully in the wider residential environments. And we have sadly always had pushback from the officers about 20 miles an hour because of the enforceability of them. If we have enough of them and we have a culture where driving fast near schools is unacceptable, we need to make, we can make progress. There has been an attitude in this council, we can't enforce them, therefore we won't do them, which is not what happened in other countries. Look at the massive programme in Holland, making schools safer environments, and we should be doing that here. So I really want to look at 20 mile an hour, not just in front of all my primary schools, but very much the county-wide thing. People do not need to drive fast in the areas near primary schools. Thank you.
I would be very disappointed if looking at school safety zones, that's 20 mile an hour would
part of the issue.
Well, it has to be part of it, yeah.
Okay,
it has to be, yes, I agree. Okay, I've got John Holland and then Caroline Phillips. So Councillor Holland first.
Yes, I agree with all of the previous speakers. I think this has been an excellent project. I think its strength started from asking local councillors from their local knowledge of where the problems are. And it's a bit like the delegated budget scheme, which has equally been very successful. The schemes, of course, are not cheap, but in the way of highway projects, they are very reasonably priced compared with our major schemes, and the impact is really, really high in the local community, because that's why the local councillor put it forward in the first place. And 20 mile an hour, the Department of Transport guidance is that the presumption will be 20 mile an hour in all residential streets. And I think Warwickshire has got quite a bit of a way to go there. And designing self-enforcing 20 mile an hour is sort of limited in what we can do, and we do need more support from the police. And if people pass that through, that would be really helpful. But a good job, well done, and I look forward to the continuation.
Okay, we've got Councillor Caroline Phillips, and you've got a cat there as well. That's a very pretty cat, so off you go. Caroline. Unmute.
Sorry. I agree. This has been a fantastic project, really worthwhile. in my area, I've got 2 crossings out of it that were really badly needed. And I just wanted to let Keith know that if you have enough 20-mile-an-hour signs up, the PCSOs will enforce it. They'll go out with their mobile speed checker, which is what they've been doing for me in Stockingford. So they will enforce that. Thank you.
Okay, and then it's got Councillor Andy Crump. Andy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, road safety is part of my remit as well. The other thing that we've got to mention still is education. Obviously, the road safety team are going into the schools and doing more and more of that, or they were until the COVID, to educate the children about all sorts of road safety issues. But they're quite good at putting pressure on the parents to slow down and to park sensibly. And it's amazing how much, once an education programme has gone in, how it improves the areas around certain schools. Yeah, I definitely agree. It's a whole raft of measures. It's not just signage. It's not just about speed bumps. It's not just about education. It's a whole raft of programmes and peer pressure as well. So, yeah. The work's been really good. I've benefited from a zebra crossing that covers by Southam College and a primary school. But saying that, I did have objections against it because it's in the wrong place or we didn't need it. Why couldn't we have a lollipop person? And we couldn't get one for years. So whole raft of and again, encourage people to walk to school or cycle if it's safe. So it's a whole raft of range of programs to get this working. But yeah, I'm fully supportive of a 20-mile-an-hour zone to make sure we don't have the accidents in and around our schools. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jenny Fragley.
Can I just say we've actually had the first meeting, I think, and set out part of the agenda if this task and finish group is approved, and I very much look forward to it being approved. Thank you.
Okay. Well, there are no more questions. I think that we've got recommendations as to note the developments that have been carried out in the last few years and to agree that this task and finish group goes ahead. It's got to report back before February for the budget and also to inform the medium-term financial strategy. So I'm sure, can I have it that everyone agrees that this should go forward? Just raise your hands, members of the committee, thank you. And I would ask the group leaders to, or groups just to nominate who they want in it. Okay, thank you very much. The next item we're going to go on to is the forward plan. And you've all been given copies of that. It's our work programme, basically. As you can see, it's got standing items, which is questions to portfolio holders and the economic development update. And for September, we've got the improvement of bus provision, which was asked to be brought forward for this, and air quality monitor reports, and we've got the local enterprise partnership coming as well. So we might even have road space allocation review. It might be too soon, I don't know. So are there any other items want to go on? Councillor Kandaka?
So thank you, Chair. It'd be useful to have the electric bus progress as part of the bus thing as well, because I want a close monitoring on that. And we should know where things are going with that. So if we're already having a buzz item on the agenda, it might be worth rolling the electric buzz pilot in that.
Okay, I'll ask that is included in the for the agenda. We'll have a look at the practicality of doing that. Any other questions from members? No. Well, in that case, we're going to get the item number 8 on the agenda is urgent items. I have no urgent items. And the last one is a report containing confidential and exempt information. So I will read out the following statement: that members of the public be excluded from the meeting for the item listed below on the grounds that their presence will involve the disclosure of confidential or exempt information as defined in paragraph 3, schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended. And the item is to approve the minutes